Alright guys, hey, it's Noah. So just with a quick little announcement before you dive into this episode. So we are currently doing a giveaway, and this giveaway is a little different. We are giving away $60 worth of comics, trades, or hey, even maybe a statue. Essentially anything you can think of that can be found in a comic shop. That's valued at $60, and it's all of your choosing. So how do you enter this? Super easy. You're probably listening to this on iTunes. Just give us a rating and a review, and then on the 31st of January, we're going to select a lucky winner. We'll reach out to you, and then you tell us what you want us to send you. That's up to $60. And good luck. All right, on to the episode.
The following episode contains or may contain spoilers. So if you're spoiler sensitive, maybe beware.
Yeah, you sensitive people.
Get out.
No, get in. You do it. You can do that.
You don't want me to do it.
No, I don't. All right. Welcome to the Phantom Zone. 3 fans, 1 podcast, and a sea of comics. I'm tired.
Kayla?
Jared. Yeah.
I was going to say hungry because you said tired, but then I freaked out and I said my name instead of being funny.
You made a choice. You made a choice.
Plus, if Noah says tired and you say hungry, you don't want to know what I would have to say.
I was.
Right.
Let's just.
Yeah. I was literally typing a note, and as you said hungry, I was trying to type the name of this episode, and I typed hungry. So I typed hungry gallery.
Ooh, a hungry gallery.
So this episode, I guess I'll just come out right and say it, is Rogues Galleries. Rogue Galleries? Rogues Galleries? How many S's
Rogues
are in
Galleries. These are not usually, that's not a pluralized noun, I think.
True.
Very often, I mean.
True.
Like a rogues gallery. Rogues galleries, right?
Yeah, people don't talk about many of them.
Hold on, what the fuck are we doing?
That's what we're doing. We're trailblazing.
Yes, we thought it would be a good idea to keep the kind of villain ball rolling and talking more abstractly about characters and focusing on specific type of characters that have rogue galleries and I guess how
what makes them bad and what makes them good and which ones we like and which ones are the best
and which ones suck. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, thank you. No,
you're welcome.
What's funny about this episode is that we've been kicking it around for a while. I think.
Yeah,
like we've
probably since
always
the
wanted to do
actually.
It. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was one of our first ideas, and it's sort of like we've been meaning to come back to it, and it would either like I don't know, it just we had other things we were going to do, and it got. But so yeah, this is it's time to do it.
Inception since the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, we have to address. Sorry, I just took the ball and ran. We have to address the elephants in the room with the Rogues Gallery. Like, kind of just up top, be like, we're not necessarily focusing on them, but we are. So, Flash, right? You guys would consider him to be the greatest with the Rogues Gallery?
No, it's not the best. But it's
No.
I guess Batman.
He's up there.
Yeah, Batman. Woo,
Probably
best
Batman.
Rogues Gallery
And
ever.
Spider-Man.
Yeah, Spidey.
Yeah.
I think quantity-wise, probably Spider-Man has the most.
It's hard to say. I mean, just
Batman's list goes on and on and on.
True.
Yeah.
Don't forget Condiment Man.
Is he part of the gallery though? I don't know.
Well, that's a good question, and I like what constitutes a rogues gallery.
Mm-hmm.
Because I would argue it isn't like every comic book character that's been around for a while has had any number of 60, 70 years of antagonists, but it's not enough. So there's just so many out there, but I don't think that's enough. So in other words, I don't know, any character you could name, even ones that don't seem to have great rogues galleries.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be honest, I don't think Aquaman has a great rogues gallery. I love Aquaman. I think he has some great villains. But I think that's the distinction we should make up top very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
which is the reason I say that. Aquaman's got like two villains. When we spotlighted him, we kind of ran into this not problem, but like it presented itself.
Ocean Master and Black Manta.
Exactly, and he's got some other interesting ones. Don't get me wrong. But overall, though, I mean, every Aquaman story, for the last something like 70, 80 years has had villains in it, but they didn't. I think so. There's some criteria, and I think we should talk about that.
Well, like with Aquaman, he has a lot of kingdom enemies or like tribe enemies or like a species enemy. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of hard to even categorize like his rogue gallery because he has like this entire, kingdom is his enemy. So it's like, well, do you add all of those into the rogue gallery or not?
But I think let's be basic about this. You need recurring characters in the rogues gallery.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's it's an underappreciated sort of concept here because sort of like there are plenty of characters that you could name that show up, fight Superman, and then don't really return. I mean, because that's the thing. Like, I think in most movies, most like abbreviated stories or something like that, a villain appears, serves the story, and then they go away.
Mm-hmm.
But a rogues gallery has to have villains that are going to continue to grow with the character over that character's life. They have to continue to develop in the same way the superhero does in like the larger world, I think.
I agree. That's a good point.
Mm-hmm. But does it count with to put Spider-Man's gallery into perspective, I feel like Spider-Man kind of just accumulates all these villains because he keeps popping up in other people's stories. Like Dr. Doom he's one of his villains too. So it's like, I feel like Spider-Man just keeps getting villains because he keeps teaming up with people or like being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Yeah.
That's another distinction to make here, which is that like I don't think those count as his rogues gallery. I mean, I definitely think that it can be the case that a villain is in two people's rogues gallery or something like that.
Right.
But, if you take the Avengers, the Justice League, the X-Men, teams that are gigantic and sprawling, there's a case you could make that everybody in that team, every hero in that team, every villain that they fought in the context of that team is one of their villains, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that really deludes the concept of the rogues gallery, right? Or at least then it's like it's so unspecific. It's like, I guess Luke Cage, one of his villains is Kang the Conqueror.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know what I mean?
Everyone has Loki in their rogues gallery.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I think, but more to the point. So it's like, but whose rogues gallery is he really in? I would say he's in Thor's, obviously, but also maybe you could make a case for Doctor Strange.
Right.
In that case, like because they have closer relationships to those heroes.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to say, honestly, I don't think it's just like accumulation. Like Spider-Man has got a bunch of villains that like, I don't know, are pretty connected to him. And one of it is he's just had more stories.
Yeah.
He's like Batman.
Well, there
are always like 9 Spider-Man stories.
I remember like looking at pictures of like rogue galleries and stuff when I was doing research for this episode. And there's a picture, like one of the pictures for Spider-Man came up and it has like Juggernaut in there, Sinister, Doctor Doom, like all these like, there's like X-Men in there and there's all this stuff. And I'm like, okay. Well,
the X-Men are part of his rogues.
No, I mean like X-Men villains. Sorry, I should specify. But then you had all his normal ones like Doc Ock and Green Goblin and Venom and Kingpin and all of them. So it was like, I mean, okay, now what do I classify as his? Because it's like, I don't know how much he's interacted with Doctor Doom. I know how much Doctor Strange has interacted with Doctor Doom, but not Spider-Man.
Yeah.
So.
And well, the other thing about that too is it definitely feels like when you look on these online lists about the top 10 so-and-so villains, they have this problem of conflating villains and antagonists. And there's a big crossover there. So it's not, it's an easy mistake to make, but let's say, I mean, I don't want to give away what I did, but like, I'll just stick to Thor for an easy example. Thor fights the Hulk a lot just because that's a fight people want to see. But Hulk, I don't think properly, just because Thor's villain.
No, he has his own rogue gallery.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and I understand that things are relative, so you could say, well, they're both in each other's rogues gallery, but I mean, ultimately, that's not what we're trying to indicate. And I felt the same way. It's like when I would read these lists, it would be like, I don't know, you'd see a hero and it's like, this isn't what the concept of your list was going for to begin with.
Yeah.
If it was just like the best fights, that would be one thing. But I think there's more to a villain. And I was going to say another big criteria is, I think, you got to have strong villains. I know it's easy to like assume that, but there's some characters I would argue don't have particularly strong villains.
Like?
I think, and don't take this the wrong way, and I know that this is just relative, but I think Captain America could have stronger villains.
I agree.
No, I agree with you. Actually, Cap is who I was thinking of before you said anything, because I just wanted to see if we were in the same wavelength.
I actually was also.
Yeah. It's a kind of glaring
Cap
weakness.
so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
He just seems to...
Obviously, he's got some good ones, but...
He just seems to do better in the team aspect when it comes to villains. Only because... But then he's facing off against big villains. So, I don't know. I think it is interesting that he doesn't necessarily have... Because, like, who's his villain that most people will think is his villain, part of his road gallery?
Well, the Red Skull.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then who else?
Is number one.
Other people
Yeah.
that aren't like Avengers level villains.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a great point, because a lot of times his villains have gotten serviced out to the Avengers. So Baron Zemo is a great example.
Yeah.
Where, because Baron Zemo has the Masters of Evil, I think people are more readily that they fight the Avengers. They more readily associate that as an Avengers villain. He's got some other ones. I mean, and the other thing is, like, you really need to read the stories to judge the stories. Some of this stuff doesn't really translate that well outside if you're not like familiar. Because I was going to say, I know Batroc doesn't sound like a good villain, but he is pretty good. You guys are familiar with Batroc?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So he's kind of silly, but,
I mean, he has.
But he's
Because he has. They had one of his big villains, like Crossbones, was in one of the movies, but like a very short little time. But then he also has like the whole Serpent Society, like. But that seems very G.I. Joey to me. Just throwing that out there.
And they don't have. They're just not these standout sort of things.
No.
And I think that. I mean, I think the issue too is that, like, this is way more important than people that give it credit for. The more I started thinking about this episode, I was like, well, damn. I mean, like, if you think about it like this, like, I kept thinking of like the Rogues Gallery as like this Swiss Army knife of stories, in a sense. Because if you think about it, like, villains end up being oftentimes the motor of a story. They're the thing that puts the sort of like ball into play. You know what I mean? Like, the hero has a peaceful life, or the city is fine, or it's a tranquil situation. And then the villain puts everything in danger, or everything he starts the conflict. And so, or he or she, starts the conflict. So So in a lot of ways, different villains sort of facilitate different kinds of stories, right? Because they have different relationships to the hero, or they have different power sets, or they have different motivations, or something like that. So in a lot of ways,
they have to kind of fit the theme and the environment that the hero's in. So
yeah. And so, if you're a character and you have a really robust rogues gallery, that means that there's more like ready-made stories that they can that a writer who's especially coming on to the series can tell about your character. And I think that's where this that's where this is important and where it's underappreciated.
I agree.
Rogues Galleries are kind of like a shorthand for new writers that are like, oh no, what do I have to do? I have to write this story about Batman. And then you're just like, oh wait, I have so many villains right now. Maybe Dr. Freeze is gonna freeze some things, and we'll have Poison Ivy come in. They're working together.
Yeah, I mean...
What about working together with members of the other Rogues Gallery? I remember we were talking about that, and whether or not it should be counted on the list, because some villains do tend to pair up more often in certain books, and some don't.
Well, I think with, like, the main three that we were talking about, so, like, Batman, Spider-Man, and Flash. I mean, Flash is kind of weird, because it's like, Flash has a lot of villains, but, like, he literally has a rogue gallery. Like, they're called the Rogues. So, like, I felt like...
cheating.
Yeah, I felt like it was kind of cheating for him to be like, oh, the best one. I mean, they are. They're great. There's literally a team of villains that are always after him. But if you think about the other ones, like they do team up quite a bit. Or like even if it's serious or if it's not, especially like Batman villains. And
I was gonna say they're always teaming up.
yeah, or even like without knowing they're teaming up, because like they're all trying to like outdo the other one all the time or using the other one, but yet they all still try to team up. I don't.
No, I think that's exactly right. And I think one thing that this necessary condition they have to have enough strong villains for it to be worth a damn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I actually wrote for what makes a good gallery, what makes a good rogues gallery. The first on my list is that the reader is excited to see them when they are picking up that book. When it's like, who's doing this? Who's behind this? If they find out who it is and that person's excited, that means that person has, or that character has a really good rogues gallery. If the people are like, oh, this villain again. Yeah, I can't wait.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. If you just compare Spider-Man to Captain America there, Spider-Man has a team called the Sinister Six. Mm-hmm. We've talked about it before on the show. The selling point is these are 6 of Spider-Man's awesome villains. And the funny thing is, if you know anything about the history of that team, there have been a bunch of different. It's a rotating cast, which means there's way more than 6 characters. If you had to do a Sinister Six of Captain America's villains, it's not a exciting team.
It would stay the same.
Yeah, it would. You'd be hard pressed to get to 6. People would be like, "Who the fuck is Flag? Who is Flag Smasher?"
The terrifying trio. That's what they'd be called.
Yeah. No. Exactly. So yeah, and I think some of that also diversity helps a lot. The character's rogues gallery has to have a diverse set. It can't just all be the same power level, the same kind of story. Some are better than others.
They're all Nazis.
Yeah.
Well, that's why. That's why I think out of the 3, like the big 3 that we're talking about, I think I like Spider-Man's gallery more for the diversity. Because you get like terrifying characters like Carnage, which is an absolute nightmare. But then you get like White Rabbit.
Absolutely.
There's just like, it's so diverse in like even just their motivations and like how fun it's going to be or how terrifying it's going to be. I
completely agree.
Yeah, I think he definitely, because like I feel like Batman's villains are all typically terrifying or like very murdery. So like,
I actually wrote this down. So I completely agree that Spider-Man, like the secret is he has tonal diversity in his villains. He has a set of, it's not just different like looking characters are different. The stories that his villains are able to tell, like amongst themselves, are so they just have such range. I mean, you're absolutely right. Like Kraven's Last Hunt and Maximum Carnage. But then also you have like Sandman stories and Chameleon stories and Electro stories, and they're way more lighthearted and gallivanting and stuff like that. What Batman's characters do that is maybe better than anybody else, and we've again talked about this story, is that it's such a collection of foils.
Yeah, like they all represent something different.
Absolutely, and they all. I mean, I think this is always necessary for a villain. A villain has to reflect something about our hero. It has to show something about our hero. It either has to change the hero, so he sort of develops or something like that because of the experiences with the villain, or it has to reveal something that we as the reader don't know about the hero or something like that. And it's so weird if I don't know if it's an accident or if some sense Bob Kane or whomever else along the way thought this needed to happen about Batman, but it's sort of like every single villain he has triangulates and puts in contrast some part of his being and psyche, and it's there. Nobody else does anything like that in comic books. I think
I think you can tell that DC, like Batman is DC's favorite character and that Spider-Man is Marvel's favorite character just because of the care that they put into the rogues gallery.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I agree.
They're undisputed just the best, and it's just like you had said, it's so intricate and thought out that even the Flash, I mean, he has a really great rogues gallery. He's in our top 3 list, but it just like there's just this huge gap between those 2 characters and then the rest of them.
Oh yeah.
Well, I'd like to hear your opinion about this, Noah, because the thing is, I don't even know if I would say Flash is in the top 3 in terms of pure rogues galleries, and I'll explain. I think there's other characters that have as many, at least. Like I think Superman and Thor. And there's some Daredevil and Iron Man, some other characters out there that have, just in terms of membership, probably equal road galleries. But the thing that a Flash has done that to me is very worth like just pointing out is they have like there's a meta level to it where they're called the rogues in his comic book, and they have like they have stylized the idea of his villains as a unit in the way I don't think any other character has.
There's literally like one of the showcase comics that they came out with, like way after the fact, but it's called like the Rogue Gallery. Like, I mean, he has like and they are called the Rogues. I mean, I think a lot of people like, I mean, it's like very on the nose, but I mean, he has more than just the Rogues, though. I mean, if you want to, like, I think one of the big things for them to be considered a Rogue Gallery or to even be put in some type of list, they have to be iconic. Like, they have to be like, that is this person's villain. Like, I know when this person's there, kind of like, okay, that's it. It's like, you're excited to see that villain on there. So it's like, you have the Flash's Rogue Galleries, you know, Captain Cold, Heat Wave, Weather Wizard, you know, a Golden Glider, Mirror Master. So like you have the actual rogues, but then you have like Gorilla Grodd and Professor Zoom and, you know, Pied Piper and Trickster and Top, if you even want to put that one in there. Like, I mean, so you have all these different types of the Top is a really ridiculous villain.
I love that scene. I love that scene in what do you call Flash Infinite Crisis? Or sorry, not, what is it? Flashpoint, the movie, just where he's like, "You're on the bottom, Flash, and I'm the top."
Yep.
Wow! Someone break his neck, please. Super speed, break his neck.
I love the Flash has such like campy villains, but I think what makes them great is that yes, like on the surface, a lot of times the Rogue themselves, they're pretty campy. Like they're just like they dressed in a costume, they found a weapon, and they're like, "I'm gonna rob a bank." But then you get such detailed and such like, heart-wrenching stories from them, sometimes even out of nowhere, that, I don't know, it's just how iconic and how important that character is tied, or that villain is tied to the character, really considers them.
And that's the thing. I don't mean just that team, the Rogues. I think that there's something about the writing in Flash comics where there's a meta level to it, where the writers know... Like, it's conspicuous amongst the writers and the readers that Flash's Rogues Gallery is a predominant one. That there's something kind of already kind of a big deal about it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He doesn't just another way to say this, he doesn't just so happen to have a lot of good villains. It's the thing about the Flash comics. Like, it's just part of the basic concept that his villains are a huge part of his world.
Yeah. I mean, who else can... I mean, I've just always been in awe that a giant gorilla could be such a iconic and menacing villain for somebody that has super speed. Like, because, you know, like Spider-Man has villains that are like, you know, lizard and octopus. It's like, okay, very animal based ones. And then it's like the Flash is super fast, but his villain is a gorilla. So, like, it's
Grodd is amazing. So here's an interesting thing, I think, which is that all the villains have to be foils in some sense, right? Which is to say they can't be random, and I think that's really missed here. So it's not just that they tell us or develop the story of the hero, is that they have to have some relationship that makes sense. You know, and so sometimes it's psychological, they're just a very different kind of person, or they're opposed, or
they killed your mother.
Kind of, so it's a vengeance aspect or something like that. But I think with Grodd, and this is going to be weird, there's an aesthetic relationship they have. He's an aesthetic foil. The Flash looks cool fighting him. Yeah. And in a visual medium, that's not something we can completely dismiss.
Yeah.
But I think there are plenty of villains that certain characters have where it's sort of like, I don't think it makes sense that you fight this character. It's fine that you do. There's a history here now, but like Daredevil and Stiltman go back. And that's a good example of a kind of random pairing that I think that even though Grodd, like, I don't think it's the same. I think that there's a certain sense of like a big hulking dour gorilla and a almost like sprightly red blur, you know, tornadoing around him. It just highlights both of their looks in a really interesting way.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, that's kind of how most of the Flash's villains are, though, if you think about it. Like, all of his villains, if you just look at the rogues from Trickster to Captain Cold, they all have these bright, crazy outfits, and they look great when they fight each other.
Yeah,
the Flash is all about looks.
Can't get
I
past
was
that.
thinking of all the pretty colors of the Batman villains too.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not unique.
That's
to
exactly
Flash,
right.
Noah.
It's mostly.
No, but you're right. It's always like the neon lights of the Batman villains are always like shining on his dark.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah, exactly.
I am the night kind of thing. No, it's very true.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also, I mean, this seems worth mentioning too, is that you can't, and this is I think where Aquaman falls down a bit, is that you need more than just like 4 or 5 arch nemeses. I think you need 4 or 5. I don't know if that's actually by its definition incorrect. Like, I don't know if you can only have one arch nemesis, but you know what I'm saying? Like, you need these like foundational villains, like 3 to 5, let's say. And then you also need a bunch of supporting villains, secondary and tertiary villains in your rogues gallery that fill things out, but also are memorable, reoccurring, relatively, worked out and fleshed out as characters. So like with Thor, you have, Loki and Surtur and Malekith and Hela, but you also have like the Absorbing Man and Ulik, and the Enchantress and stuff like that. You need them because they're part of the story too.
And they live in that
and I
world.
think that's another thing. Yeah, exactly. And that's better for the writer to get to do. So it's, in other words, you have a story and your hero is fighting the big bad, right? That's the sort of main architect of the violence or negativity or whatever. And then there's going to have to be supporting characters. And if you have a character where that one of the supporting characters can also be a really intriguing villain, so in other words, you got, Norman Osborn, but, it's not just nameless underlings that Spider-Man's fighting. He's got Electro and Sandman and Chameleon. Then that's just a better, I mean, I hate to say this because it's so simple. That's a better story.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's true. And it's also, I mean, I had trouble thinking about like which one I want to talk about, or even to consider if X-Men would be part of some of the greatest rogue galleries. Because, I mean, can you count the entire Brotherhood can you count the Brotherhood, but you can also count the rogues from Flash. So it's like, I'm actually kind of surprised that X-Men isn't higher on most people's lists.
Well, the thing is that I think once you get into certain kinds of teams, it's hard. It's not that they don't have great rogues galleries; they absolutely do. It's like those 3 big teams we've always mentioned. The Avengers, Justice League, and X-Men. They have probably, if you count them, they have the greatest rogues galleries ever. But they're sprawling sort of things. Right. You know what I mean? And in certain ways, they represent their universe. So it's sort of like who are the Avengers rogues galleries? You have some classic ones like Kang and Ultron, but really Doctor Doom, Thanos, Galactus, or anything, But I think smaller teams like Doom Patrol, for instance, maybe even Teen Titans to some degree. I think then you can talk about like a kind of more coherent rogues gallery. So that which is very specific and just to them.
That was something I was thinking about because it's like. Because these teams have villains, but then I think the X-Men are a weird kind of gray area because it's like they're always a team. It's not like the Justice League where they team up whenever a villain shows up. The X-Men are always a team that always have Mystique, Sabretooth, Morrow, and Magneto, and Toad, and all those people that are always after them. So I couldn't. That's why I just wanted your guys' opinion if it was. Do you consider them?
No, I think you're right in terms of the X-Men don't really break up. You're not going to read a separate Kitty Pryde issue with different villains, especially like just with her.
Exactly.
And though you can find pieces of the X-Men, like specific
like
members, obviously that, but even away from him, like where he had like Wolverine, and obviously we're going to talk about that soon, but has a sort of standalone existence. I mean, Kitty Pryde's a better example, right? You can take these characters that generally only exist in ensemble worlds, and some of them actually do have specific, villains that are connected to them, but
Scott
it's
Summers
not many.
And Logan.
It's more of a grudge match, I would think. Yes, and vice versa. But I was gonna say, I don't know.
Well, there is I see what you're saying, but I think like the larger picture is like Kitty Pryde. I love Kitty Pryde, and she does have her villains that she's fought when, she's in Excalibur or not. But if you take, some of the other X-Men, who are they most likely going to fight? It's going to probably be somebody that the X-Men typically fight as a whole, even if it's just Pyro or I don't know, Mastermind or something like that, So I think it's an interesting thing to distinguish.
And then the story dynamics are just so different that it's not that they're not relevant to our discussion. I think in a lot of ways they are. It's just that the sort of mechanics of the story are just not the same. So a good example is like usually the idea is a villain or villains like have some relationship to the hero, the particular protagonist or something like that. Like I said, they developed a character, they are the obstacle that they have to overcome, that kind of stuff. When it's a team, then that villain ends up it's not like he's a foil for each of the members independently. Mm-hmm. And he might be a foil for the larger concept or through line
like Magneto.
That thematically connects it. Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. But then he ends up being an obstacle that then, creates that occasion for an ensemble kind of set of dynamics or something like that. Like, you know what I mean? Like, okay, it's sort of like you mentioned in our villain episode where it was sort of like even underdeveloped villains can be an occasion for like team sort of like, disagreements or conflicts or something like that. Mm-hmm. So it's not, I think it's related, but it's definitely like the way that the X-Men's gallery works definitely seems to be like, they're just like, they can have more villains.
Yeah. Well, there's just more of them. So, most of the time with teams, you're going to have either like that universe's villain fighting them or like the biggest villain of one of the members fighting them. So like Loki fighting the Avengers.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And then I'd also go on to say that it's less common you have one with a weak rogues gallery.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, we can probably think of a few characters, we've mentioned some already, that like the rogues gallery really isn't that strong, but they're still a pretty good hero, or they're a great hero, whatever. The Hulk is another one. I think the Hulk has a really lame rogues gallery.
He has like what, it's four? Like big characters?
He's a lot of repetitive ones.
Right. Like what, the Abomination and Wendigo?
And it's because of the limitation of that.
People can we fit in?
Big, scary ones.
and I hate to say it, but there's nothing wrong with minimalism necessarily, but I think some of this is like the limitation of the aspects of that character. You have the strong, angry monster, or you have the scientist,
Right,
and there's a lot of stories you can tell, but like his villains end up either being just super angry people, big angry people that can fight him directly, or conniving, scientists or whatever, you know what I mean? Like a military personnel or something like that. Mm-hmm.
So, before we go into our little spotlights, the ones that we kind of picked as our favorite, or ones that typically...
a little bit more love.
Exactly. I think it's interesting. We kind of touched on it a bit, but then kind of got sidetracked. To make a good rogues gallery, I feel like, and this is a given, but it's worth talking about, is that their villains, like their team of villains or whoever they usually fight, have to, I guess, play to their strengths in a weird way, if that makes sense. So like a good example is like Doctor Strange. So like Dormammu is one of his main villains, but then you also have Nightmare and Eternity and stuff. It's very like weird cosmic-y magic stuff. And a lot of it's not necessarily brute force fighting. It's all like psychological and stuff like that, or outwitting the other person. It's the same thing with Flash. So like you got Captain Cold as like his main villain. Cold makes things slow down. So it's like, it's funny that, it's very on the nose, but if you like kind of back up and think about it, it's like, oh, well, of course, this is why this villain is part of this gallery.
Yeah, and I think a good way to connect that, I like that point a lot, because I think the idea is that the villains, especially the good ones, are going to sort of organically grow out of the concept and the world that is central to that hero. Mm-hmm. So with Thor, you get a tremendous amount of like mythological and cosmic villains.
Psychological with Batman.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. With Superman, you get a lot of sort of like
experimentations.
Alien, exactly, and like the contrast of like people like Luther, the world of tomorrow kind of.
Yeah, stuff. how they view the world in a whole.
Iron Man, you get a lot of industrial sort of, vanguard of technology and commerce and stuff like that. Yeah, so I mean, I think that's a really good point. That like ultimately, that will happen. But it's to your point, to make it kind of exemplary. It's sort of like the villains that best exemplify and sort of bring out and bring to fore that world. I think, end up being the best villains,
right?
And the main part's the rogues gallery.
Yeah.
All right, so getting into the ones we picked. I'm gonna kick it off with Jared.
Yeah, I can do that. So here's the one I wanted to mention real quick that I was going to pick Invincible originally. I really liked his villains. I know. And the reason I didn't, for a couple things. One, I thought it was important for rogue galleries to have a life outside of a single writer. Rogues galleries, so one of those. This is ultimately why I made the decision to kind of move away, because Invincible is the work. Yeah, it's an amazing work of Robert Kirkman. But because it's one writer, and also there's this meta character to Invincible where it's almost designed to be a good comic book. Which it sounds weird because they all should be. But what I mean is that what Robert Kirkman does is he identified the major tropes of comic book storytelling and draws attention to them and does them in a very solid way. So, in other words, of course he was going to have a strong rogue gallery Invincible because that's just one of the tropes of comics. So he intentionally did it.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, that makes sense.
You see what I'm saying? Like he there's almost like
he wrote it with the intention of making a rogues gallery.
He manufactured the perfect one.
Yeah, kind of like the Flash.
In a certain way, that's right. And I don't want to get too far on this. It is, in some sense, the strength and weakness of that story because in a certain way, there's this non-organic feeling to Invincible. A lot, like in other words, it's not just a person telling a story through these tropes. It's a person telling the story always directing you towards like, Isn't this kind of villain? Isn't this kind of story? So good and bad. Anyway, but I didn't pick Invincible, but I thought he was worth mentioning. I picked Wolverine, which is just really weird because Wolverine is maybe my second or third favorite comic book character, right up there with Aquaman or right there with Thor. Not quite, let's face it. Anyway, but so it's fine. It's good to finally get to do him on the show. I think one of the things that I love about this character is he does have, to me, right, all of the criteria we've been mentioning, or at least a lot of them. Like he's got a diverse set of characters. He's got, that like they all have a certain connection to him. But it was fun looking at the theme of his villains. And the one that I kind of identified, I think, is that most of his villains end up like they sort of point at the tensions that exist in the character, because Wolverine, even if you're not a huge fan, you kind of know this about him. He's always got this tension between being a kind of animal beast and a kind of like his id-like anger and rage and things like that, and being a more high-minded character like a samurai or a spy or something like that. Yeah, and no laughs at things he doesn't like. Anyway,
it's just those two differences. Like those, it's
I know, but that's not.
No, I know. I'm just saying it's funny as a whole. Like when you put it that way, it's like, oh yeah, he's either a samurai or a Wolverine.
Yeah. I mean, there's some. If you put it like that, that's kind of true. Anyway, I mean, it's not like they dressed a Wolverine up in a samurai outfit.
I wish they
not
did.
That we shouldn't. We should do that. Okay, so like, put a pin in that. But, and so a lot of his characters sort of speak to those kinds of problems, and those characters end up being like, as you're probably familiar, like Sabretooth. Daken is his son. So Sabretooth, if you don't know, is just a mutant. I mean, everybody, I think, who's going to listen to this podcast knows who Sabretooth is. But he's a very similar character to just draw your attention. He's a feral mutant. Sabretooth is, if Wolverine didn't have a moral center, almost exactly what he would be. Hold on one second.
Is that a monkey?
No, Loki's decided he's going to play with his toy. Sorry.
How mischievous of him.
I know, right? But yeah, so I think he has plenty of adversaries that sort of point to that. It's almost the road less traveled in the negative way. You know what I mean? His son Daken also has a very similar character. He's sort of, also went by the title of Dark Wolverine for a while. So similar character with healing factor, claws. I mean, aesthetically, Wolverine has a lot of villains with healing factor and claws. That's just part of the territory or whatever. Yeah, but the other thing I think that you get in his stories is Wolverine's constantly running away from his past. So this is a character that has lived, because of his healing factor, has lived for, the better part of, I think, close to 150 years. And it's not just that he's lived a long time and went through tragedy. Even though he's a good man, he's led a kind of shitty life. Mm-hmm. I mean, even if it's complicated, it's been very violent and corrupt. He's done a lot of bad stuff, and he's worked for a lot of bad people. When he says he's the best there is at what he does, but what he does is not very nice, it's usually killing mofos. You know what I mean? It's not. So a lot of where we as readers in our sort of quasi present day start with Wolverine is his time with the X-Men. It's really Wolverine's redemption tour. And so a lot of his bad guys are sort of characters from his past that, at least symbolically, don't want to allow him to move forward.
Dicks.
They're characters like Omega Red, who, this sort of Russian sadistic sort of Cold War serial killer character who, dates back to when Wolverine used to work for the Canadian Special Forces, that's the funny thing, that they would have a Special Forces program. Anyway. Yeah, it's just crazy. But so it's sort of, it's it's an enemy that he can't leave behind from a time when he was a government spook and a hired killer and the tool of bad men and things like that. And you have very similar sort of characters. Lady Deathstrike, I think, is a fantastic Wolverine character. And I mean, the funny thing is the villains are always wrong, right? I mean, for the most part. The villains are, it's not like Deathstrike is logical or ethically sound when she's mad at Wolverine. I think her dad ends up getting killed and disgraced. He's the one that came up with the method by which to bond adamantium to Wolverine's skeleton and claws. So it's one of those things. She's not correct about that, but it always reminds him of the mistakes that he made.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, like I said, I think that's kind of what's great about reading Wolverine villains, is that he's a tragic figure. He's always got this tension, and his villains will never let him forgive it.
Of course not.
And they span across time.
Yeah, absolutely. And different sort of story genres, too. Another villain he has, the Silver Samurai.
Yup.
He's great. So I actually love this character because it's kind of silly and garish and everything like that, but they reduce it to a sort of sensible level. The comic book didn't really, or sorry, not the comic, the movie, what was the movie called? The Wolverine, right?
Oh, yeah. I can't.
The one where he's in Japan?
Yeah. I forget about that
It's
one.
more like that thing where it makes reference. So the Silver Samurai is a character who's obviously a samurai. And he usually hired muscle for groups like the Hand or something like that, but he has the mutant ability to put energy fields around objects, like small objects. But the way he utilizes that power is to put one around his samurai sword, and it makes it basically can cut through anything, and it's indestructible and stuff like that. And he's a great secondary villain because, again, it's back to that aesthetic foil. He just looks really cool fighting Wolverine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was the one that was involved.
And then we rip into him.
Yeah.
Apparently.
Yeah, exactly.
He was the one that was involved when Wolverine was getting married in Japan, and then Rogue showed up, right?
There's a couple of so Wolverine's had a couple of bad marriages, believe it or not.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. He was married, I think I'm going to get this name right, because to a character named Mariko.
Yeah.
And then she was later killed.
Yeah.
Or died, and her father ends up being having this huge his what do you call it? Blood debt or vengeance, and their fight actually is fantastic sort of moment in Wolverine. Wolverine also was tricked into or extorted into marrying Madam Hydra.
Yep.
AKA Viper. So he's made a lot of bad romantic decisions. And she's also a great villain for him. And then I'd say one of the two other kinds of villains that Wolverine ends up sort of having are the kind of government sort of spook or scientist that's trying to use Wolverine as a kind of like killing machine.
Yeah.
Like William Stryker's the one we always see in the movies, but you have this guy, Dr. Abraham Cornelius, who's like that's the scientist that perfected the process of creating Weapon X.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, like, I hate to say it, when I was looking through his villains, I was like, they're all very, very sad. They make me sad for Wolverine. But they do help tell his story really well. And in terms of comic books, some of it's just because the nature of what Wolverine is. His villains scare the shit out of me.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that.
I don't want to go up against any of these rogues galleries.
No, that's absolutely true. I just mean visually, like, from almost evolutionary standpoint, they have a lot of teeth and claws. And they're all, you know what I mean? Like, it's just a kind of scary look.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean...
So that's Wolverine's Rogues Gallery.
Yeah, he has a very oddly diverse cast of villains.
Well, again, because like Jared was mentioning, his stories just kind of defy genre sometimes.
Exactly.
So
it's just funny with, like, somebody from the X-Men also has, like, a lot of ties to, like, Japan and, like, samurais and stuff, but then also, like, secret agents and
the Canadian Special Forces.
Yes.
And he was in World War II. And
I mean,
he's kind of a cowboy.
I would be kind of...
And he's also short.
Yeah, I would...
And drinks beer.
I would be grumpy if I was him. With all of those, like, that's just so much to deal with. It's like you never know from what era.
He fights sometimes.
Yeah, true. All right, I'll go over mine because it's short and sweet, and because this team is going to get a lot of attention soon-ish, but there's a lot with this team. So the Fantastic Four. So these guys. So I picked them, and it's kind of hard picking a team to
Wait, why are they going to get a lot of attention? Just real quick.
Because we're going to. Why would I say that on air? That's not what.
I don't know. That sounds good. Okay, go
ahead. God, Jared. They can't know our secrets.
Okay, cool.
So I want to say, because I was looking back at the Fantastic Four's villains, and there's a lot. But the interesting thing about them is that most of their villains went on to be like Marvel themselves, like the Marvel Universe villains. So you got Doctor Doom, you got the Skrulls, you got Galactus and Annihilus, like those names alone, but they started out as Fantastic Four villains. So I think it's really interesting that this team that's very like high concept sci-fi, but also traditional superhero comics, like conceived these villains, or these villains were first appeared in their comics to later then go on to be everybody's villain. So it was interesting, like, doing this team, because it's like, yes, this is their rogues gallery, but then it's also everybody else's in a weird way. I mean, you have, like, the Frightful Four, which, if I'm going to be honest, is a really weird team. Like,
I love them, though.
They're so weird. So you have Madame Medusa, the Wizard, Paste Pot Pete, and Sandman. Yes, Spider-Man's Sandman. So, like...
Yes. And then later on, they'd add Hydra Man and Claw.
Yeah. Which
to fill it out.
It's such like a, not to use this word that we've used today already, but a hodgepodge of team. Like, it's just like, it's a weird, like, because Sandman's in it. So it's like, well, why are you in this team?
So it's almost, I mean, you're right, because it's almost kind of cheap, but the way that they explain it is just like, it's just Wizard hiring people.
Well, yeah, because Wizard was Human Torch's villain when he first started, or he stopped him when he was doing a crime, so he got upset and wanted to hire other people to take on the Fantastic Four. It's funny. But anyway, so like, so I think, so the best way to kind of see their rogues gallery, because Fantastic Four has been in and out of comics. They recently just came back. They had the Future Foundation. A lot of people have joined the Fantastic Four, but the Lee and Kirby run with the Fantastic Four is the best period to see their main villains. So like Dr. Doom, Puppet Master, the Skrulls, the Frightful Four, Maximus the Mad, Diablo, the Mad Thinker, the Red Ghost, Galactus, Annihilus. Like, those are just to name a few that were introduced in that run, or that were big parts of that run. So these guys have huge villains in their stories that make up their rogues gallery as a whole. So I think it's interesting that this team can be like, well, they were our villains first. So like, we know how to defeat them.
I don't think anybody's really going to push back on this notion. So I don't want to say it like it's controversial, but like they really are still Fantastic Four villains. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Even though that you're absolutely right. I mean, Annihilus was the main, the arch villain of the Annihilation storyline, and you mentioned, I mean, Super Skrull's been all over the cosmic
Galactus.
Sort of Ronan, the Accuser, started off as in Fantastic Four comics, and I don't know if he first appears in the Avengers, but like he really becomes sort of like fleshed out in Fantastic Four. Mm-hmm. Also, Namor. And we forget.
I was gonna
Namor...
get there, you dick.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, I didn't mean to. You can edit that out. I didn't want to say it.
You dick.
Yeah, sorry, my bad.
No, it's fine. You can say it. No, yeah. I mean, in Fantastic Four #4, he attacked the surface world, Namor. So it's interesting that he's technically one of their villains.
Yeah, it's really there's almost a comic book superhero extinction in the late 50s that we forget about, where the characters that were from the Golden Age, like Submariner and Captain America, had to be brought back in quote unquote modern times in the 60s. Avengers #4, Captain America gets discovered, and like you mentioned, the Submariner comes back in Fantastic Four. Mm-hmm. So it's just really cool that he ended up, and he's still like, an antagonist for the Fantastic Four a lot, even though he's practically part of their family.
Yeah, I mean, I always see the Fantastic Four as this huge, like, foundation. I mean, it's like this huge foundation for a lot of the Marvel universe. And I feel like people that don't read it or don't know much about them won't realize that, because their arch nemesis is Doctor Doom. And Doctor Doom plays a huge part in a lot of the Marvel stories that sprouted ever since his existence. And then, like you said, Galactus and Annihilus and all of them, I mean, it's all continuously just rippled out of them. So that's mainly why I picked them, is because the importance of their rogues gallery to the universe as a whole, I think, is really interesting and worth mentioning.
Well, certainly worth mentioning. And the other thing that's cool about them is that people forget, if you're not a big Fantastic Four fan, it is a superhero story. You can't avoid that, but it's also very sci-fi.
Yes,
that's in its orientation, and the movie that they did last that everyone agrees was awful, or at least didn't do so well.
I didn't mind it.
One of the things I think they got right was to understand that it has these strong sci-fi elements.
Well, so that's the thing about the movies that have come out. The two interpretations of them. It's like the one with Chris Evans and Jessica Alba, and I forget the other people or whatever that were in it. It's like they got like the superhero-y thing down, but then it was lacking big time in pretty much everything else. But then this new interpretation had so much science and so much of that in there that they lacked the superhero element of it. And I mean, just the basic concepts of the characters, but also the superhero elements of it. Because I feel like this team is a good marriage between both of those things. Not only because they're inherently in a comic book, but because they're based in science. They got their powers from science.
I mean, I don't read Fantastic Four very often, but I know that like they should be getting a lot more respect than they do, just because they are kind of just like Marvel's
family
foundation for a lot of things.
And that nexus point between like superhero stuff and traditional superhero stuff and then sci-fi, it really does explain and account for like the wildness of their villains.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Half of their villains are these crazy ass jet setting, into the negative zone kinds of monstrosities.
Like I have a list of like some of their big villains and kind of like what they did in this comic. So like just to kind of give you the diversity of these humans that got powers from science, essentially. So you got Mole Man that attacked the surface world. You got Namor that attacked the surface world as well. So you got these different species or a villain attacking the surface world. You got Doctor Doom that got sent back in time in one of the Fantastic Four. So you got time travel. You got Puppet Master that tried to infiltrate the team. So you got, the whodunit, who's there. You got espionage. Yeah, you got like I talked about the Fretful Four wizard teaming up with Paste Pot Pete, so creating a type of rogues gallery. You got Red Ghost and the Super Apes that fought the team
Love them.
on the moon. So they're
can't say enough about them, how much I love them. Go ahead, but it's so good.
Yeah. So they fought them on the moon. You got the Mad Thinker that tried to match wits with them. So you got you got pretty much Jeopardy going on. You got Super Skrulls.
Yeah, it's true.
You got Super Skrulls who are an alien race coming in. You got Galactus that's devouring planet.
Worldender.
Yeah. And then you have a Nihilist that nearly took over the galaxy. So like, it's just, their villains alone, just in that short list it's just, you get so much diversity with them. And then the team itself, like you can't go wrong with these guys. I'm done talking with these guys. I can go on and on about them.
I mean, here's the crazy thing too, is that like everybody always has villains and awful, crisis that they're in Fantastic Four stories. The world is always about to end. It's always about to blow up.
Yeah, because there's like a black hole that's mysteriously appearing in the center of the earth, and only they know about it. It's like...
Yes.
Yeah. All right. I'm done. That's Fantastic Four's villains. Big ones.
Nice. So last but certainly not least, when I always knew who I wanted to do for this episode, because it's right up my alley in terms of aesthetic, and I truly believe that her rogues galleries are unappreciated. So I'm totally going to mention Wonder Woman's rogues gallery.
Yay!
Because I love her, and like I said, it kind of plays up to everything I really like outside of comic books, which is just like, it's all based in mythology, or at least most of it is, or most of her villains have mythological ties. So if you kind of like ancient Greek or Roman, like the classics period of time, you'll find villains there. But also a lot of her villains are women as well. So, diversity in comics, what? So ironically, she does have kind of a mini, like the Rogues, like the Flash does, but it's called Villainy Incorporated.
Yes.
Villainy Inc. And I mean, like the members, it's been around since her golden age, so like the roster changes a little bit, but like Giganta, Cheetah, Dr. Poison are part of Villainy Inc. And those are some of her big ones.
I love it.
I know, right? And when I read that name, I was just like, you've got to be kidding. And so just to kind of touch on a couple the Giganta appeared in 1944. So Wonder Woman number 9. And I don't really ever think of her as one of her main adversaries, but she's kind of always been there and is always on the list. She's joined Villainy Inc. And then Ares from the first movie, but also from almost every Wonder Woman story. Ares is just kind of like, obviously, the god of war. Representative of like, he is her foil.
Yeah.
Where she's just like love and peace. He's obviously just like blood and hatred and war.
He's always the villain behind, like, anytime they redo her origin, or anytime she has an origin, it always goes back to him.
All of her major stories too. It's like, oh, this surface level villain, like blah blah blah. I stopped you, and then it's like it was Ares.
She takes the mask off.
And evil.
Yeah.
She takes the mask off, and he's like, "Ah, it was Ares the whole time." She's like, "Yeah, I know, I know."
It always is.
Yeah.
He literally appeared in Wonder Woman number 1. So.
Yep.
Main villain since the beginning of time, stretching through time. I wouldn't be surprised if in the new movie coming out, it looks like Cheetah is going to be the main villain. I wouldn't be surprised if Ares makes an appearance going like, it was me the whole time, just like he did.
I was Christian Wiig the whole time.
But mentioning Cheetah, I would say that's kind of who I picture as being Wonder Woman's Joker. There's been several different. I think, Noah, you deep dived Cheetah, didn't you?
I did. In the villains episode. Yep.
Yeah. So there's been different women that have been Cheetah throughout time. She recently was tied to one of Wonder Woman's origins too, not just Ares.
Yep.
But Cheetah's been around since Wonder Woman number 6. And like I said, I would consider her probably Wonder Woman's main villain. And then we have things like Dr. Psycho.
Yeah.
We have Eris, the goddess of discontent in Greek mythology. So
yeah, all hell Eris,
sister or daughter of Ares, depending on what myth and comic continuity you were doing it. That's kind of weird. But, co-partner with Ares, we have Silver Swan, which is based off of the Hans Christian Andersen story, The Ugly Duckling.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not even just pulling from like Greek mythology, we're pulling from fairy tales. The firstborn, Circe, is from like, I believe it's the Odyssey.
Yep.
Queen
the Odyssey,
Clea.
yeah.
So Medusa, you pick apart mythology, fairy tales, and that's basically the inspiration for all of Wonder Woman's villains. And again, reading the list, most of them are women from these same times, and also just it's so cool.
I think like
one Wonder Woman's like, oh my god, antiquity's trying to kill me.
I mean, one of my favorite things about Wonder Woman, and I mean, I think it's most people that end up reading these comics and fall in love with these characters, is their villains. And like, Wonder Woman's villains are insane. They are crazy. I mean, I think recently what I've liked too that they've done, so you have, like you said, all the mythology and then the fairy tales, but now you're starting to get like these corporations. So not Villainy Inc., not that one, but like literal like Lex Luthor type characters, because you have these women that are in power that are messing with artifacts or trying to find the mascara or trying to do this. So Wonder Woman's coming in contact with like a whole different breed of villain. So I think it's really interesting that she's starting to get like the trifecta of like her villains rounded out. So you got like corporate, then you got like espionage, and now you got, and then you have all the mythic, fairy tale stuff. So she's got
most
it
of
all.
her main ones are like god tier villains.
Literal gods.
Yeah, exactly. With Nightwing, I love him. He shares a lot of villains with Batman, but again, most of his typical ones are like mobster level villains, like street level thugs that he has to defeat. And then just reading off, I'm guessing the same thing would happen if you do other superhumans like Superman that have the physical strength and durability that Wonder Woman does, but she's literally fighting gods and goddesses all the time, or doctors, or like Dr. Poison, or kings and queens of nations.
Yeah, she parallels very nicely with Thor in a lot of aspects.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very, because she is part of, this type of godlike, mythology, and then she has all of the sciencey stuff, and then the cosmic stuff, and then all this stuff. So it's always interesting reading her, because you never know what you're going to get or who's really behind everything.
Yeah, what scale are you going to be?
Yeah, it's similar to Thor in that like a lot of Thor's villains are like, oh yeah, there's this giant who is older than the universe who has a sword that's gonna kill everyone.
Exactly.
But I think it's interesting too the way that like a lot of Wonder Woman's villains are like they sort of challenge her moral center in a sense. As it's hard to pick, but I mean, if I had to pick like the character that was the most morally upright character, like just that whose ethic and personality is, I know it's weird to be like is the best, it's Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
Like
I mean, she has her moments, but so much of a concept is balancing this love and compassion she has with everyone, including her villains, with this ability and willingness to fight, for what's right. I think that's one thing that I've liked, that they've done it like, I think the big point for me with Wonder Woman, because you're completely correct with everything on how she is, and how most of the time, like the Boy Scouty or the good characters, they go bad. So Superman's gone bad so much. Wonder Woman has like never, she has a few times usually when Superman does, but that's just the Elseworld story that we usually get.
Yeah, that's just sexist writing.
Exactly. But the one time where it was, I mean, I felt really hard for it was when she killed Maxwell Lord. With because the ripple effects from Teddy Cord being killed and then, going on from there. But when she killed him, like that really, she snapped, and like, I don't know. I love it. Like her villains really play into that and push her so much.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Good foils.
And I love the way that, I know this is more about Wonder Woman than villains, but like I just so love like when the other superheroes, especially like Batman's like, we can't kill or something like that. And you get this sense from Diana. She's like, you understand I have a sword, right? Like, what do you think this is for?
Well, I mean, that's like the whole, there was that Batman Brave and the Bold, or even the annual that they had kind of recently when they went into that dimension and they were there for like they had to go there at a specific time, and they had to fend off all these demons because they were essentially giving the Guardian a break. The person that was like holding off all these demons from destroying Earth, they gave him like a 5-minute break, but in their time it was like 40 years. And it's like Batman ended up killing in that one because like he tried not to, but then it's like, yeah, you kind of like look at Diana. Yeah, look at
they're demons. They're demons. Send them to hell.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I loved Wonder Woman, so I was so happy you picked her.
Me too. I have no doubt. Again, because it just the royalty of it, just the level it's on is kind of just elevated compared to most rogues galleries that I love. Even so,
hell yeah,
Wonder Woman's rogues gallery. Appreciate her more, please.
Comic book reading recommendations. So, go ahead, Jared, since you went first.
Yeah, so I would check out Wolverine by Daniel Way, like his entire because he did Origins and a number of other stories, but they have the Daniel Way Complete Collection, and it's volumes like 1, 2, 3, 4. Just start with 1. And the reason I say that is that like so much of Daniel Way's work on Wolverine was about going through his past again. This was, by the way, at the time when they were just like, we're revealing his origins. No more Wolverine mystery history. This is what it was. And it was a risky move. It turned out to be really good. And so much of it is going through like a linear sort of like movement from one villain to the next. So it's just a really good way to rediscover his rogues gallery. So I would check that out. Wolverine by Daniel Way, Complete Collection, Volume 1.
Hell yeah. Mine is Stanley and Jack Kirby. So The Pearl and the Power is the specific story that I'm talking about, but since it's a little older, it's only in like one of those collective works.
Like the compendium?
Yeah. It's Fantastic Four Masterworks Volume 1 or Volume 1 with Jack Kirby and Stan Lee. The specific story, though, is, like I said, The Peril and the Power. And so this one has Dr. Doom. He uses the machine to steal the power cosmic from the Silver Surfer. And then not only after that, but there's like a globe-trotting adventure that happens with the Inhumans, the Frightful Four, and a bunch of other villains. So you get a lot of what I had talked about earlier with their villains being introduced and popping up and stuff in this. So get that one.
Nice. So for me, I'm going to recommend Wonder Woman Love and Murder. It came out in 2007, written by Jodi Picoult, who's actually a best-selling author outside of comics.
Wait, that's a story?
Love and Murder?
Oh, I thought you were recommending 3 things.
Oh, what? No.
Wonder Woman, Love, and Murder. Those are the 3 things I recommend. Sorry, go ahead.
Art by Terry Dodson. Basically, Wonder Woman and her secret identity is tasked to capture Wonder Woman. So Diana Prince is assigned to capture Wonder Woman. She kind of has a battle between like how to preserve her secret identity with an old foe kind of just circling around her. So it's really interesting. It's a really good, it's really well written. So pick it up.
Hell yeah. Well, that's it, guys. That is our Rogues Gallery. So, see you in 2 weeks. Bye, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Oh, God. Fine. Bye.
Thanks for listening. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at The Phantom Zone Pod for more podcast updates.